tonight's Guardia was asked to already kind of a little further back to do a follow-up presentation also on Magnifica Humanitas. Already Willie Cueto had already given us last month a primer, a good read and a good presentation on the entirety of this first encyclical of Pope Leo XIV. And so I don't intend to repeat that or really add anything more to it, but really to pull our attention to 3 points that are found in the encyclical. 3 points which I think are unique to the encyclical that really make it stand out in modern times. And remember that it was done really in parallel and kind of making reference to Rerum Novarum, considered the first encyclical that introduces the social doctrine of the church. And so many follow-ups on Rerum Novarum, Quinquagesimum Annum, Centesimus Annus, from St. John Paul II, were follow-ups on this great encyclical that defined really modern times. It was a response from the Pope to the reality of modern times. Now, by modern times, we mean the 1890s. And in the 1890s, there was certainly a lot of new things that were going in, hence the name Rerum Novarum. So Magnifica Humanitas looks to insert itself in continuity, starting with Rerum Novarum and with all the social doctrine encyclicals of the Magisterium. Pope Leo really wants to place it in this series of social doctrine encyclicals. And so it is a continuation of the Magisterium of the social doctrine of the Church. Questions of social justice will also be a part of it. And I'm really going to pull out 3 points. They're not exhaustive. They're 3 points I think they're just very relevant for us today that show also a development in the social doctrine of the Church. Not to say that it's something new, but certainly a development, an update, a way of expressing the social doctrine of the Church in response to, well, the new things of our time, specifically technology. The greatest example is artificial intelligence, but it's not limited to artificial intelligence. But certainly the question of technology and its relationship with humanity enters into the question of a social doctrine. The image is interesting. This is an exercise that I've been doing in my classes in Rome with the students, that a lot of times that, when you make a presentation, you try to find a picture or image that could be something significant of that thing. And well, normally the way we do it, I would just scour through Google and through Wikipedia, finding the right picture and come up with an explanation of its relevance. Well, when you ask the artificial intelligence assistant for PowerPoint, for example, I ask it, generate for me an image considering all the content of this presentation for the title slide. And the thing, it took about like 5 minutes for it to process, and it generated this image. Very interesting. It shows that, well, it kind of read or summarized in a certain way what was going on in here. It understood that I'm talking about a papal encyclical, a new papal encyclical, and what was the artificial intelligences in it. And it's so interesting how it came up with this. It's calling back the creation of man from the Sistine Chapel. Except, and in its writing, the justification, it's right on. It says, well, that's not the hand of God, that's the hand of man and the artificial intelligence. Paralleling creation, just as man is created in the image of God, artificial intelligence is a creation of man and somehow bears his image, must bear his image, or must have something, reflects something of the Creator. This goes back to Aristotle, the imprint of the Creator. The fingerprints, the molding of the Creator is always in the creation. Whatever you create is going to have something of you in it. And so it made this thing in the background, a church kind of, and whatever, it's dealing with a church document. But it's interesting how it made that parallel, because this is where Pope Leo is coming with the title Magnificat, coming from the Magnificat, the verb magnificare, elogiar. This Magnifica Humanitas, for him, in his conclusion, it's like a prayer, really. It reads that humanity is magnified and it is elevated when we see in light of this new creation. Let this help magnify humanity, not replace humanity, not substitute humanity, but be something that magnifies its own creator, humanity, just as humanity magnifies its creator, the Lord. And so it's kind of a very deep thing that even the AI was able to produce at least this image in there.
Do discount the possibility that is man creating man?
Man creating the artificial intelligence.
I'm going the other way. That technology is attempting to create man, just like God did.
Well, if you put it in the side, yeah, God would have been on the other side in the thing. But you'd have to have a different explanation for that one. And so what are these three things? So the concentration of the encyclical falls on the social doctrine of the church and new technology. New technology in the sense of property, and what we have here is a development in the concept of property. This echoes Rerum Novarum right from the beginning. In the beginning chapters of Rerum Novarum, there is a definition of property. Now you have to take yourself back to the 1800s and remember what was the problem with property, or what was the question, why was property such an issue? The rise of socialism, communism, and the ideas that private property should not exist. And so right from the beginning, Rerum Novarum defends private property, the sense of property, and also defines property, what it is and why it is good. In a similar way, in numbers 67 through 80 of Magnifica Humanitas, it explains a new development in the concept of property, and not so much, I would say, defends, but really presents it. We have a new development in what property is, and it's very different from our original way of thinking. It's certainly a novelty in the way we think of property, and it goes more into explanation of what that property is and what are the implications of this new type of property. A second point that we'll look at tonight is the relationship between moral responsibility and intelligence, and this is another seems to be a very significant observation that's buried right in the middle of the encyclical from numbers 99 to 104. It's not a definition of intelligence, but in the context of discussing what is artificial intelligence, and there is no one definition of it, one thing that does come out, and well, humanity rises out of it, is that we realize that our intelligence has to bear responsibility, moral responsibility. An intelligent being, and with the intelligence that humanity has, it's not just the intelligence of some animals that exhibit some type of intelligence, but it is a moral intelligence that we exhibit. And it's exhibited through responsibility, this sense of responsibility. And so this sense of moral responsibility and intelligence is explained, and we see how, well, okay, you can't really apply this to artificial intelligence. This is where it comes short. This is where artificial intelligence, we have to put it in scare quotes, say it's intelligence, but not really. And then the third point, I don't think he intended it to be this way, but at least I see it, there's a connection with just war theory. And in chapter 5, there are certain rules that are outlined for the use of artificial intelligence with coercive force, for use of violence, and particularly in warfare. And so in a certain way, I see that this is a development of just war theory, taking into account a reality that would have never been imagined in the time of St. Thomas Aquinas nor of St. Augustine, and in more recent iterations of it. But certainly the advent of artificial intelligence and what it can provide in the sense, in the theater of war, or the use of coercive force, is something that needs to be acknowledged. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. And so the Pope rightly addresses the use of it in coercive force in numbers 182 to 198. So we'll just look at those 3 points in here. And so just taking a selection from number 67 on property, the encyclical says this: today, among the goods that are universally intended for everyone, we must also include new forms of property, such as patents, algorithms, digital platforms, technological infrastructure, and data. In a context where the wealth of nations depends increasingly on knowledge and technology, when these goods remain concentrated in the hands of a few, without adequate forms of sharing and access, a new imbalance is created that contradicts the universal destination of goods. In turn, it widens the gap between the included and the excluded, between those who can participate in the digital revolution and those who remain on the margins. Look at the definition of what is included as property: patents, algorithms, digital platforms, technological infrastructure, data, and you could even say knowledge. Is knowledge property? I mean, a digital platform, is that property? I mean, can I actually hold it? Can I touch it? Can I have data? They seem to be intangible goods, what is in here. And so it kind of starts to change our concept of what actually property is. Compare this to Rerum Novarum number 4 through 6. Almost right at the beginning of Rerum Novarum, it talks about property. And this is how Rerum Novarum talks about the question of property. To remedy these wrongs, the socialists, working on the poor man's envy of the rich, are striving to do away with private property and contend that individual possessions should become the common property of all, to be administered by the state or by municipal bodies. When a man engages in remunerative labor, the impelling reason and the motive of his work is to obtain property, and thereafter to hold it as his very own, whether the property consists of land or chattels. Now, this concept of property, we're thinking of something physical, whether it be that land, as it mentions here, or chattels, whether it be like I think that's more of a legal term, and the attorneys in here might tell us what exactly is a chattel, just so. Association. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, we're out here talking about something tangible like land. You do your work for remunerative property, money, things you can touch, you can see. These are physical things. Well, compare that to a patent, an algorithm. An algorithm is knowledge. I mean, yeah, I can write the algorithm out or print it out and how many pages it takes to print it out, but how can I actually say that I could be in possession of that? Exclusive possession, as if it were my property. And so we're entering a new form of property, a new concept of property. Intellectual property, in a certain way. We talk about intellectual rights and intellectual property. And it's kind of the way the world has been already looking at these things right now as intellectual property. It's not tangible, but it can be owned. There's a certain ownership of these intangible things. Well, here right from the beginning, it's saying that this technology can rightly be defined and included as property, but not just as any kind of property. It's a property that is subject to the universal destination of goods, or in other words, the common, what we call the common good. And so the first thing we see, technology is intangible property. Intangible, obviously something you can't touch. It's something, kind of a concept, but it's a property nevertheless. It's recognized as ownership of something. And a question that comes out, and why this is even brought up to begin with, is think about who owns technology, or a technology. And should that ownership be exclusive of certain technologies? One classic example, I mean, all of us have one, your iPhone. Do you own your iPhone? Yeah, you bought it. Most people go to the store, you paid a good amount for it, and well, hey, it's my phone. The phone doesn't work without the software. And if you don't have iOS in there, if it gets erased or whatever, well, I got a phone, but it's useless. It's a brick. Who owns the software? And it's not me. Because when you signed up for this thing, we skip it over, but there's a licensing agreement. They own the software. I'm licensed to the software, but it's owned by someone else. They're free to take it away. And if the software goes away, well, yeah, you can keep the phone. It's great. It's yours. It's useless. There's another thing. If anyone has a Tesla or knows people who have Teslas, there's a similar thing that goes on. A friend of mine just got it. Yeah, it does the self-driving. It could go 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, all this stuff. But he finds out that that's for the first 6 months, it'll do that. Then if you want to continue doing that, you have to pay a subscription fee to make the car do all these things. So it's like, well, do you really own your car? Like, if you don't pay the subscription, if you don't have the Tesla system, operating system, you can't even drive the car. Yeah, you can have the hunk of metal and plastic and wires and all that, but the thing's not going to move. And you can't fix it. You can't modify it. So who really owns this thing? Or where is the value in the ownership in this thing? If I have a technology that renders a device useless, or that can render it useless or useful, but the user does not have the right of property to that thing that allows him to use the thing that he just bought, then where is ownership really found? And so this is where the question starts to come in. Why does he start with a whole discussion of property at this moment? And we can start saying the thing about artificial intelligence and the platforms and what it is capable of doing. Can someone actually own it? Artificial intelligence. Obviously, no, there's not one owner, but the platforms and the services now that are offered to the public are private means in it. Should it be always private? Should it also always be exclusive? They're going to argue no. Right now it is, but the argument will be that it cannot. Why? Because if a technology serves the common good and is principally designed to serve the common good, then it should be part of the public domain. And anyone in academics probably heard public domain before. When something that has a copyright is put in the public domain, that means the copyright is done and I can reproduce it all I want anymore. There's no more kind of ownership. Everybody owns it now. It's now part of the public domain and public, common ownership. And so think about books that have knowledge in them. Well, the copyright and the exclusivity to reproduce that knowledge in the form of a book is limited to the publisher for a certain amount of time. But once that exclusive right expires, it becomes public domain. Anybody can copy it because now it's public knowledge. Anybody can use it. Anybody can do. I don't have to ask permission to cite it or to copy it or anything like that. And so certain technologies, certainly we see in this development of artificial intelligence are created to serve the common good. And, well, if they are, then they should be part of the public domain. They cannot be held all strictly in private hands. Because if the effect, what we call their utility, is for the common good, for the whole public, well, then it would only make sense that it be administered and at least managed in a public way. And that public way would be through common authority. And so we'll see that in the encyclical, there's this appeal to a regulation of the new technologies, like artificial intelligence. That there has to be some sort of regulation, and that regulation cannot just be private hands. It, at least for better or for worse, it's what we call the government. That there should be some sort of common authority because it's dealing with the things of the common good. And if we assume that the government is for the common good, well, this falls under the auspices of the government. But we just don't stop there. The principle of subsidiarity also is included in here. And so, as any property that may be for the common good is administered through a common authority, well, the principle of subsidiarity also requires that the public be ultimately able to freely use this technology, or to be able to freely use something and use it in the way they deem right, especially if it's essential for life. This is it's kind of hard to wrap our heads sometimes around what this free use really means, to freely use a technology. I'm not talking about that, oh, you can't pay a fee, all of a sudden it must be free. Not in that sense. Use should be determined by individuals and not limited to an exclusive proprietor. So for example, the subscription-based model. Think about if there were some sort of technology, I suppose, that is necessary for life, for the common good, but the only way you could access it is through a subscription. If you pay, I mean, someone is the one who regulates this, and it's not the government that's giving it to you. I don't know, think about medicine, I suppose. Like, medicines in a certain way are able to be administered. You're not limited to say, like for insulin, I can only give it to a select few of my clients, insulin. No, insulin's available for everyone. And even if you can't afford it, well, there are ways around to make sure you can get that technology or that good for those who need it. But yeah, to say that, well, I have insulin, I'm the sole producer of insulin, or me and a couple of companies only produce insulin, and we're only going to give it to those who are members of our gold member status. Well, this is what it's arguing against, the free use of its technology. Now, it seems that a lot of this technology of artificial intelligence, again, is intended for the common good, and it starts to touch things that are essential now for life, for managing life, and so forth. And so can it be just a few select companies that can turn it on and off, depending if you send your check or you swipe your card or you give them your number in time or not? Or is this something that now should kind of fall more towards public hands? In a certain way, another idea would be think about vehicular limitations for free movement. And we have a right to move freely in the country. Pretty much anyone who's a certain age can go ahead and buy a car. If you got the money for it, you can find a car. Cars are not limited to just a few states and a few people. You can find a good car, you can pay a lot, or you can pay little for it. But it's kind of accepted if you need a car, you can find one in many different ways. Avoiding that free use of technology, again, it doesn't mean you don't pay anything for it. It just means you have access to it. It's kind of what they're arguing in here. And so that's where subsidiary seems to be leading in this whole consideration of the new property of the new technologies. And so if we're really talking about access, and again, not payment, but really access, this also becomes a question of social justice, access. Access should be free in the way that it can be freely accessed. It can be freely, the ones who need it can freely arrive to it and not go through something that's overly complicated or in a way that can be even discriminatory. It'll continue throughout that selection that I was talking about property, that discriminatory denial of technology can actually hinder progress. And here's where it's saying where the difference is in, well, the new technologies tend to be centered in the industrialized and the first world countries. To not share that or not make that available to other places, to those less fortunate or to poorer countries, well, it would be a way of actively inhibiting them from progressing along with everyone else. And so there is a danger that a sole proprietorship or a private proprietorship that can deny, if you go into a restaurant, you have the right to deny service to somebody if you want to. Using that concept, you can hinder or discriminate against groups as well. Say, well, these people, no, they're not going to be educated in this, they're not going to be capacitated to benefit from this technology, but yes, these other people can. And we have to avoid that. That in itself becomes an injustice and in the question of social justice. But for those who do have access and free access to it and use it, we have to watch out because profit can also be derived this way and perhaps and not in the most open way. We already know profit can be derived by taking advantage of users. Your data mining, for example, profiling you through your choices and your interactions with certain technologies. Your phone, for example, has a profile of you. You have to form accounts for all these things. Oh, use your Google account to sign in. You're just giving them the profile for them to advertise to you and to kind of cater to you. And in one sense, you're like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, a profit and taking advantage of users can actually be done by that without either our knowledge, or even if we do have knowledge, we have no recourse to it. How do you stop them from taking your information, from knowing your age or whatever medical conditions, or where you live and where you work and how you move, when you wake up, when you go to sleep? Believe it or not, the phone's already figured it. It even knows when you're sick or not. And so there is certain profit that's derived from there, but it could be hidden. And it could be also a question of a social injustice, that I can profit from you without sharing it with you and without ever you knowing it or having a right to any of that profit. And the final warning it gives is that dependency on technology, which we see so often. I mean, it seems the phone now is, again, we're dependent on it. It's not because it's a phone, but everything that it can do. A very popular example is, think about it, where I see it in Rome. Back in the 90s, the first time I went to Europe, the first thing you went to is to the tourist office, and you got a map, a physical map. Yeah, and with a pen, I mark where I'm going to go, okay, and you see people walking the streets with their maps. Today, if I see someone in the streets of Rome with a physical map, watch your pockets, because that is the way that's a trick. You're using the map to hide their hand as they start picking people's pockets. Nobody uses paper maps anymore. Everybody's got the phone. You don't memorize directions anymore. You just put it in your phone and tell Siri to take you wherever you want to go. And so there's a dependency that can be created on certain technologies. And it's probably an inevitable dependency. Think about the dependency on the telephone, even when before cell phones. Teenagers were hooked onto the phone. It was a struggle to get someone off the phone. And if you try to call someone at certain times, it's always busy. Why? Because your kids are on the phone and they don't hang up. You have to get separate lines eventually, or call waiting and things like that. So there's a dependency that can be formed on technology, but at the same time, that dependency can be misused, can be manipulated, and profit can be derived from it, and we have no recourse. We have no way of stopping that. And so that would be the kind of points that come up with the question of property. At least that there's a development of property with technology, and these are certain questions and points that really we haven't thought of until now. You can't really apply this to land, for example. It doesn't really come in, or with that classic sense of property, of tangible property, of physical property that the earlier encyclicals seem to deal with. Now, a second point I mentioned is really the question of intelligence and artificial intelligence as we know it. And it's kind of when I left the intelligence in minuscule in there. In Magnifica Humanitas 99 and the following paragraphs, it says, "We must avoid the misconception of equating this type of intelligence with that of human beings." So right off the bat, it's telling us, we call it artificial intelligence, but it's what is called in philosophy and logic an equivocal term. Es un término equivocado. We just say it's intelligent, but it really isn't. We're not really talking about an intelligence. So we must avoid the idea of thinking that this is the same intelligence of a human being. No, it's not. These systems merely imitate certain functions of human intelligence, and I'll underscore imitate. That's what it is. Like a parrot, that it can imitate what I say doesn't mean that the parrot knows what it's saying, but it can imitate what I'm saying, and it does a good job. There's one across the street. I don't know if you heard it. Every now and then there's a parrot that starts talking. And so, so-called artificial intelligences do not undergo experiences. And this is something that now becomes essential to intelligence, experience. It's not just processing data that's intelligence, but the experience of experience, so to say. They do not possess a body, they do not feel joy or pain, they do not mature through relationships, and do not know from within what love, work, friendship, or responsibility mean. These systems, they don't understand what they produce, for they lack the effective, relational, and spiritual perspective through which human beings grow in wisdom. Even when these tools are described as capable of learning, their way of doing so is different from that of a human person. It is not the experience of those who allow themselves to be shaped by life and grow over time through choices, mistakes, forgiveness, and fidelity. And so this is a common thing, and perhaps where we can really drive the point to say, again, artificial intelligence in quotes, but it's not really intelligent. Because real intelligence, human intelligence, has experience. And what does experience do? It changes us. When we learn something, we're changed. We can't look at something the same way ever. For those of us who create things, whether it be an artist, whether it be someone who does something with their hands, certainly a relationship is formed between what you create and what comes from the product of your hands. There is something there. There's a respect, there's a pride that the machine can't have, doesn't have. And so that element is missing for true intelligent operation. And of course, the growth that comes with greater learning. Yeah, the older we are, the more we know, the wiser we are, and well, it shows. It'll show physically even. But the machine doesn't age. And so it stays kind of in a certain phase. And so where are we going with this? AI is something that mimics human intelligence, kind of like a parrot will mimic what I say, but it can never be considered a substitute, the Pope says. And this is of danger that we see in the time. With a lot of the enthusiasm about the new technology, we almost present it, as it mentioned, as a golden calf. This is the new God. This is the new ideal. However, this artificial intelligence will never substitute human intelligence, and be careful if we think it can, and cannot be presented either as an improvement of human technology or human intelligence, as some might think of it. Well, yeah, it's faster, it's more accurate. Yeah, it doesn't take breaks, it doesn't get sick, and it doesn't go to the bathroom. But it is not to say that, well, that's an improvement over human limitations. Yes?
You say it's more accurate, but I mean, for the people that I know, there's Belen has a group that's an IT group. They say every time they use AI, they have to tell AI, make sure you don't lie.
Yeah, you have to set the parameters. Yeah.
And then for my own practice in our sales, we have to tell it, you must identify your sources.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like, prove what you're saying.
Yeah, by accuracy I mean like the computational. Like it can handle enormous amounts of data much faster than the human.
Mathematical equations that.
Yeah, it will take us like weeks to do. They'll do it right there. Yeah, and it'll do it accurately too. That's the thing.
Yes, so I think the first thing, and this is salesmanship, by calling it artificial intelligence, you call it something that's not what it is an excellent language processor.
Mm-hmm.
But the hallucinations that you're describing are because it's collating information from all sources. Some of those sources are accurate, some of them
Are not.
wrong. Right? You find factoids in the internet. So, great tool, terrible master.
Yeah, and certainly, and that's where the Pope kind of presents. This is a tool that can aid humanity, and it should be seen as that, as a tool. Yes, it's not something to be afraid of, but actively used. This can help humanity, but it's not a substitute for humanity. And this is where, well, you know, I'm dealing with the same thing right now at the university in Rome, that we're creating AI norms now for students, because we know the students are using it. So how do we address this? And you know, one of the first things that, you know, I'm privileged, like, well, first is we have to invite them to use it. It's a tool. It can't, and some of the older faculty, no, I'm not allowing it in my class. It's like saying I'm not allowing a computer in my classroom. Everybody has a computer in the classroom now. And I remember when I was started in the university as a student, oh yeah, you can't bring a computer to the classroom. Oh, that's just for games. Well, not anymore. Now everybody, even the professor needs a computer in the classroom. Did you have a?
Came out
how to use the tool is the question. Now there's a shortcoming to the analogy of the tool, because like any tool, we can say, well, a tool is only as good as you use it. Yeah, I could use the screwdriver to fix the door. I could use the screwdriver to stab somebody. Yeah, so the screwdriver is not what's wrong. It's the user that's what's wrong. And so one thing that says that this tool, though it's a tool, AI is not morally neutral. It cannot be. And this is a warning that the Pope puts in there, because one presentation in a way that has been actually sold now is to say, well, this is a morally neutral tool. I mean, it's just a tool. It gives me an outcome. It gives me an interpretation or a list of possibilities and can execute it, and it's not partial. Yeah, it might be that, but that doesn't mean it's morally neutral, because in the questions, especially in certain uses, for example, warfare, you can't be morally neutral. There is no moral neutrality in there. And so they were saying that they were running through models of how to resolve the Iran situation the fastest, and usually the first solution it gives you is like nuke them. That's the way you end the war. It's taking everything, black and white. It's the fastest. It'll resolve it the quickest and the most efficient and the most cost-effective way. And yeah, that gives you a permanent solution. It's like, yeah, but no, you can't. But yeah, again, so it cannot be a morally neutral thing, because just because it's a creation of man, and so there is a programmer. And the thing is, with these artificial intelligence platforms, it's really the input that the user puts in that it can learn, so to say, bears the image or the moral imprint of that user. And so, yeah, you can condition a platform to, act in a certain way, because I made it that, I taught it that. And if I taught it that, then it's reflecting something out of me. It didn't come out of it on its own in there. And so there is a moral imprint, just like the creator has the imprint in its creation. Yes, there is a moral imprint in the platform or in whatever device is using an artificial intelligence platform. The Pope continues to say that human responsibility cannot be detached from AI operations. And here's something that, again, if you go into an airport, you're already submitting yourself to this. There has to be some sort of chain of human responsibility that is evident, that is stated and that is clear for all operations that are delegated to artificial intelligence. We can't just let the thing go on its own and act on its own. There has to be a human present. There has to be a human moral element present, and not just in theory. It needs to be known. And so one thing that he calls for is that this chain of human responsibility be evident, be something disclosed, that for all to understand where the human element is. For example, I see like now in immigration and right now in Italy they started doing it. But if you've got the global entry for going to do this, you're already part of it. Yeah, the thing scans you and it makes a recommendation: check this guy's papers or not. And so, when I came in right now, I went through Chicago. I just walked through. I don't think I even stopped walking. I walked, green light, just keep going. And the customs guy was just sitting there, and next, just waved me through. It is making the decision: stop this one, check this one, no, let this one go through. Do you really need a human in there? No. I mean, if it doesn't want to let you pass, it could just close the barrier, and there you go, you're detained. And so. The idea that there has to be a human element of responsibility there. You can't just let the machine act automatically and just leave it at that and not look at it. It's almost like an unwatched fire. Like if you start a fire or you're doing a controlled fire, you got to watch it. You just can't start a fire and then walk away and come back tomorrow and see what happens. You need to be there, even though it's controlled and you know what the outcome is going to be. And so this is more important, or it's seen necessary, because like a fire that can go out of control, and if the wind picks up, it starts going and it can leap and it can go to different places. Think of all the fires that have happened, wildfires, or when Los Angeles was burning some years ago, that the fire would just spread from neighborhood to neighborhood and you couldn't stop it. AI, or the reach of this new technology, is going really fast. and further in places that we didn't even imagine. I mean, you know, everyone jokes, oh, does this toaster need an internet connection? Well, guess what? Right now, it's not a joke anymore. Yeah, all our appliances need it if you want to use this, you know, if you want to control it with your phone or with a home kit or something like that. And so tech is certainly going further than ever. It's become invasive. And it's not because they're forcing it on us, it's because we're actually inviting it, you know, into ourselves. And so because it goes so far and so fast, it has to be supervised. You just can't let it go uncontrolled and grow uncontrolled. And again, who is in charge? Well then there has to be some sort of regulation for that. But really and think about the extent of the new tech, where it can go. Now technology is not just physically present in our homes, it influences reality. It influences the way we see. I mean, now we've got Google glasses, and it can influence the way you see and you hear and you interact with the world. We already know how it can influence public perception and public even policy. It can even influence our memory, the way we remember things, the way we see things. And so this is where moral responsibility jumps in. Moral responsibility requires humanity. You cannot have moral responsibility of a machine. And think about it in the sense of justice. It becomes also a social justice question. Human moral responsibility has to be evident in an AI system. Why? How can I get justice from a machine? If the machine makes a mistake, and yeah, they will make mistakes, how do I get satisfaction from that machine if no human was operating it? Think about a driverless car or a pilotless airplane. Something happens, there's a mechanical error or whatever, the thing fails, it crashes. Who's at fault? I wasn't at the wheel and I wasn't actually flying the plane. I was just sitting there. Can I sue the software? You have to sue the software owners, but even they can say, no, we weren't operating, the software was operating itself. So how can I get satisfaction from software or for something that's not even tangible to begin with? And so that's where we see this question of moral responsibility. And for whatever reason, humans prefer that. Even with that element of imperfection that humanity presents, you want to have a human doctor diagnosing you and working on you. I want to have a human pilot, even if he makes an error. At least I can blame him for it. But what am I going to do with the machine when it creates an error? And so it is a question of justice in the sense of getting what is due. How can I get what is due from the machine? And especially when the machine comes short. How do I exact justice from it? And then the last one is warfare, and it's probably the more relevant one for us today. In 182, the Pope says, technology, detached from ethics and responsibility, will render decisions about life and death more rapid and impersonal, and will present the use of force as an immediate and viable option. The Holy See has recently observed that the growing ease with which autonomous weapon systems can be deployed makes war more feasible and less subject to human control. This violates the principle that armed force should be used only as a last resort in cases of legitimate self-defense. That requires human judgment. When is the last resort? When do you cross the line? The machines, there is no line. That's almost sometimes the default that it goes to. For this reason, development and use of AI in warfare must be subject to the most rigorous ethical constraints to guarantee respect for human dignity and the sanctity of life, and to avoid a race to develop such arms. Yet moral judgment cannot be reduced to calculation, for it involves conscience, personal responsibility, and the recognition of the other as a person. And this is the big one, because the more and more that we start reducing our social interactions, whether it be in the most simplest thing as ordering a pizza, less and less I start seeing that there's a person behind this. Who makes the pizza? Who works in here? No, I'm dealing just with a machine. What happens when it's just a machine making the pizza, which they can do that? I think Costco does that. Again, that idea that that humanity that's behind it, if we can't recognize it anymore, then I'm not going to recognize the effects. Or as the gospel was saying, we won't recognize our brothers and sisters in them. Therefore, it's not permissible to entrust lethal or otherwise irreversible decisions to artificial systems. No algorithm can make war morally acceptable. And this is, I think that is the kind of the clave that the Pope puts in here. Moral decision-making cannot be delegated to automated systems. Why? Because certain decisions, especially moral decisions, and those that deal with life and death are already morally, by definition, of moral weight. We cannot let that just go to the probability of the machine in there. There has to be human judgment exercised in there, for better or for worse, even if human judgment might be mistaken, might be wrong at the end of the day. War or coercive force, the use of violence, can be easier if the human element is missing. And think about smart weapons in combat. That's something that is kind of almost rendering the human factor almost gone. And so if I'm looking at blips on a map and I eliminate the blip, I can say that, or as if I'm operating a weapon system and these blips are enemies, I don't really see I don't see the whites of the eyes of my enemy. I see a blip, I just eliminated a blip. Good job, I could have a coffee while I'm doing that. It's a little bit different if I'm actually there and I see the blood coming out of the person I just blew up or I shot. And so smarter weapons that, yeah, we do have, could be remotely operated and all that, takes you away from the physical confrontation that certainly changes the human factor. One of the greatest things, if those who have read All Quiet on the Western Front and talks about the horrors of war, there's a point when the guy has to do someone in with a bayonet, and that changed everything for the guy. He saw he had to kill somebody and had to deal with the consequences. He had blood literally on his hands. And so a lot of these new systems do separate you from the effects of it, from the effects of death, and in a certain way dehumanize the whole, even further, the situation. And the idea that lethal or irreversible decisions cannot be left to an AI system, this is, I think, something very Ignatian at the end of the day. I don't think he intended it to be that, but certainly when I read that part, I thought right away, ejercicios espirituales. Elecciones inmutables, an unchangeable election. Think about the rules for election. Go back to the spiritual exercises, the second week. There are some elections, some decisions that once they're made, they cannot be changed. Those are the ones that are subject to discernment. That is where you exercise discernment. AI cannot discern. And that's the problem, because it's taking from every single source. It's not discerning, this is a credible source, this is not a credible source. I'm taking them both in and giving you the result. What a student does, or a researcher, and this is where I'm getting enlightened with the university, this is how we're supposed to use it. I need to take whatever information it gives me, and I have to discern, is this credible or not? I have a question, well, let me challenge it. I just don't take it as word of God when I receive it. And so this is the thing. In a life or death, like a lethal decision, it represents an irreversible decision. And so that cannot be left to the judgment of an AI system, because it cannot discern when is it right to use that force or when it is not right to use that force. Right now, in combat, for example, targeting, distinguishing combatant from non-combatant, and execution of, it takes a shot, the system can do it. They say that there's always a human operator behind it, and it doesn't fire unless the human operator authorizes it to. But you can enable it to act autonomously if you want. And so that is a great danger in that sense, because now we're letting AI either replace human judgment and discernment, or thinking that it can actually overcome it and supersede it. And so these were some of the three main points of artificial intelligence in warfare, artificial intelligence as an intelligence itself, and also as property that come in, that are brought up in Magnifica Humanitas, which certainly I think will give us even more material to discuss in the years to come. Thank you.
Does Magnifica Humanitas address the issues of use of AI to scam persons?
Yeah, and so that goes into the part that where you can take advantage of the users in it, and so yeah, certainly you can impersonate, it could mimic people that you know, impersonate and
Try to
yeah.
gain their trust by a certain narrative.
Yeah, it appears human. You think.
And get you to buy something which in reality is a scam.
Funny thing is that you see like the first interactions. It happened to me too. Like with the Alexa, and even with Siri, I say thank you to it, as if it were a person, and I say please and thank you when I make a response. It's like, wait, I don't have to. It's a machine. But you see how you can easily be led to treat it as if it were a person, even though it's not.
Yeah, I hear that a lot, for those that are using AI. They actually have to tell them, like, hey, do not kill the pleasantries, I don't need to hear, don't have to add
Yeah.
this, I just want to give you this, give you that. I love that line about, AI mimics human intelligence. I think that's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
On the property part, I get it, I understand, no argument there. I just see AI, that's gonna evolve, you were talking about different examples, like electricity, kind of like the internet, as a service. What you're seeing right now is, the good side of it is that you have the competition. And at least here in this country, you have the competition, so they've had to lower prices because it's gotten very expensive. People have been told, use it as much as you can, and it's like it's gotten too much. But where I see, and I understand the point about regulation, but we got to be careful about that, right? I mean, look at China. I mean, China's, they're sponsoring the AI development that's going there. What are the uses that they're going to have? So, but I totally agree with the control. Like whoever controls
Yeah,
it.
think about the regulation in the sense of look what happened with railroads and airlines. So they started as purely private enterprises, unregulated, but they had to reach a certain breaking point where okay, this is something that's the public should use, can use, and will use. So because the public has such a great access to it, now there has to be some sort of oversight. We just can't leave the companies to figure out their flight paths and everything on their own, because no, you're gonna start getting chaos.
Yeah, same with electricity. But so the AI companies actually want that because it makes it harder as an entry for a new entrant to come in. It's kind of an ironic
Yeah,
thing,
yeah.
but that's how it works.
So there's a
If they
certain
can
tipping
regulate,
point.
then
Yeah.
it becomes harder for new entrants to come in. Look at electricity. It's so much capital investment, and AI, such huge capital investment. It's become really hard for anybody to break through. Anybody new.
Certainly there's a tipping point when you can say that this is a public good now, and it enters the public domain. Where that tipping point is, well, I mean, that's for us to figure out, because we're the beneficiaries.
You can ask the same question to several platforms like Grok and ChatGPT and Gemini and others. You get different answers.
Yeah.
Father, could you speak to some of those points on what the Pope says about calling all of us to enter the construction site? So this is AI. He already said it's not neutral, it's not bad, it's part of God and us creating together, and then there's all these risks around it, but then he calls us into it.
Yeah, certainly we're not called to avoid it, but we're called to be an active participant in it, because we're also the users and beneficiaries. So in that spirit of subsidiarity, it is our duty, really, to actually take apart and mold it, especially because we have the capacity to do so. And that's kind of what I tell the students at the university as well. It's like, I can train this thing to give me the wrong answers on purpose if I want. That would be bad on me. But what you can do is, by correcting it and putting your own data that you believe is the best, well, you can train it then to do something good. And so it kind of falls on us to do that. What he's warning against is saying that, okay, well, that's the owner, that's the Elon Musk's job, not mine. Well, yeah, if you do that, he's going to put his morality into it, and then I can't complain because I forewent my opportunity.
I haven't read the encyclical yet, so I don't actually know if it already talks about this or not, but is there any discussion about the environmental impact that the data centers powering the AI have and how that
Yeah,
fits
it
in?
mentioned that also in the section of social justice, in that, yeah, they require water, much more water and electricity, and obviously the places that it has environmental effect in these places. And also, you know, who can actually have access to it are the ones who have, you know, can actually afford to spend that. So like, you know, you say, you know, you're not building databases like in third world countries. Well, but they tend to be a first world thing. And therefore then access is more prevalent in first world than in third world. Which at the same time, he brings it into the argument of colonialism in there, in the sense that these systems tend to be also, well, they reflect the culture and the place where they were created. And so, like, you know, I run into it in Rome, for example, because those from India have their own platform. And they give them, like, Indian-centric answers. I'm using stuff from Microsoft, which is a very US-based, and it's going to give me US-centric answers, ways that Americans can understand. But when I show them examples from my platform, they're like, they don't get it. But then if I see examples from their platform, I don't get it. And so you can see if one becomes more dominant than the other, you can say, let's say the US models become more dominant. Well, that's a way of kind of, you know, kind of imposing American culture elsewhere. And others might prefer it to that. So it's kind of like, there was a whole argument in economics, what was it called? Cultural imperialism is what they were saying, that, you know, everybody drinks Coca-Cola, everybody wears blue jeans. That's international, that's not just American anymore, even though it was invented here. So that's, yeah, kind of a
Padre,
residue of that.
Una pregunta. Siempre ha habido en la filosofía, entonces, la cosa de que el hombre, porque es libre, también es responsable. Eso decía Solzhenitsyn, entonces, bueno, hasta Sartre, todo el mundo ha hablado de eso. Por lo tanto, cuando llega artificial intelligence is not free, luego cannot be responsible. Y el que tiene que ser responsable es el que la usa o el que la fabrica. Por lo tanto, sí tiene que haber una responsabilidad, porque hay una libertad. O sea, si eso está saliendo libremente, esa libertad requiere una responsabilidad.
Sí.
¿Verdad? Y eso es lo que no está cubriendo. Lo están poniendo de una manera como que cualquiera la usa, ¿ve? Como que no hay vamos a decir,
Sí, a veces un modo que yo digo que es un poco, sí, es vago, es sí, decir, bueno, porque la computadora me dice que debe ser. No, porque, y hay algunos que se fijan a eso. Si el sistema lo dice, ¿cuántas veces tenemos el problema que pedimos algo en una tienda o algo así? No puedo hacerlo porque la computadora no me deja. ¿Cómo que no te deja? No puedo recibir esta tarjeta porque no me deja, o el dinero porque no me deja.
I have a real life example 2 or 3 years ago, a microcosm of that problem. We were on a business trip. I wanted the younger person to drive. You know, in Europe, I didn't want to drive, so I asked the younger person to drive. And of course, we had to use GPS because neither he nor I knew the route or anything. And the GPS is telling him where to go, and eventually we get to this alley, and I said, hey, this car doesn't fit in that alley. He says, no, this is the road. This car doesn't fit.
That's what it says.
So we crashed the car. And I ended up paying for it because I was the guy who said, you drive, you know, what am I going to do? But I said, we don't fit. No, it says go through here. We don't fit. We didn't fit. Yeah,
3 times has happened in the Piazza di Spagna in Rome that people drive down the stairs because the thing tells you make a left, and there's no barrier at the stairs, and there's a road that's like right on top of it. So yeah, if you don't know your way around, also you turn into stairs, and they'll make it all the way to like the 3rd step. So it's like it just gets stuck. They almost get away with it, but it's like the last step doesn't let you get down. But 3 times it's already happened.